So,
All right.
so
All right. Go, John. What was that? What are you gonna say?
uh, yeah. So, just going to say, so 5% of all people have radial loops. Was it 5% of men? About 20% of people in the caring professions have radial loops.
Where did you get that figure from?
Oh, I don't know. Over the last year, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that
So,
might be that might be John. That might be kind of thing Johnny says. 20% of index fingers have radial loops.
sorry, I'm talking about yeah, yeah.
And a lot of people with radial loops on their index fingers work in the caring professions. So I don't know about the actual distribution in amongst people in the caring professions, but so, but yeah, radial loops are very rare. They're about 5% of the total fingerprint pattern distribution in European population, but they occur disproportionately on the index fingers. That's the key thing to note about radial loops is they're not that common. Actually, they are the fourth most common fingerprint pattern, but only 5% of fingerprint patterns amongst Eurasian peoples. But they are extremely common on the index finger. And so this is something we're talking about in the class tomorrow, Jerry. The that is the statistic that makes radial loops on the index fingers incredibly important
Mhm.
because it's a
Yeah.
rare fingerprint pattern, hardly occurs on any digit except on the index finger. And on the index finger, it's so common, it's almost as common on the index finger as a whirl on the index finger.
Hmm.
And whereas on any other digit, it's completely rare, like 1% or none. I mean, you
Yeah.
never see radial loops on air fingers or thumbs. They just don't exist, basically. I mean, they
I
maybe
have.
yeah, they might exist at a 0.001% sort
Yeah.
of level, but it's literally that kind of you could practically say that they don't exist because the stats are so low. And it's not impossible, but unlikely. But the radial loop is incredibly common is incredibly common on the index finger, and so that therefore becomes very significant. And of course, we know it's significant. It's on the index finger, so it's to do with the person's sense of identity. Does that unpack that a little bit for you, John?
Yeah. So, what do you see the radial loop on a male on the index finger? Um, you see it less on a woman, don't you?
Hmm.
So on a male, you're going to probably more inclined to be attracted to the carrying professions, but on a woman, the same, would you say?
Um, No, that depends. Men are funny about radial loops, as you know, um, because they're either really sensitive, in which case they get crushed and overwhelmed by the sensitivity, or they get sensitive, they're really sensitive and go, but men aren't supposed to be vulnerable and sensitive, so I better toughen up. So they get super tough. So they get a really hard, brittle shell on the outside. They get really defensive. So a lot of men with radial loops on their index fingers are often incredibly egotistical they perceive their vulnerability, that what they do in order to compensate is they kind of put on these outer layers of armor and shells to protect themselves. I mean, you've got to look at all the other features in the hand. For example, if you've got a reduplicated ending to the waterline, you're going to get absolutely that kind of role playing that's going on all the time as a defense mechanism and a guard against that vulnerability. So they're not open. So they don't want to be into spaces where there's sharing and vulnerability because they don't want to do that because they don't want to share and be vulnerable. It is if you go back to the if you look in at stuff I put out in December, John, the research I did into the handprints of people who do karate, radial loops are much, much more common in the hands of men who do karate. It's really weird. It's like, what? It's like they feel vulnerable, so they need to learn self-defense, because they want to defend themselves. Their self needs defending. And it's like, why do you feel you need to defend? Well, I feel vulnerable. I mean, you could be attacked at any time. I mean, people say things, they could throw things, they could throw a knife at you, or they could jump out of a dark alley because I'm on paranoid tenterhooks the whole time because I'm hypervigilant, because I'm brought up in a critical environment, because I've got no armor, and because therefore I need to learn to defend myself. So I'm going to learn karate. It's like of all the things that we found is like, what? Really? That? It was like quite astonishing that it was actually, obviously you get fire earth handshapes and fire skin textures in people with karate, but the thing that was different, the thing that stood out was that there were much higher incidence of radial loops on the index fingers. Like, what? That was completely surprising. But when you think about it, it completely makes sense. So I think the answer to your question is it kind of depends on the guy. And obviously, guys with radial lips and only fingers can indeed be very sensitive. But they've got an awful lot of cultural baggage and cultural conditioning to undo to get to that point. And so if they are a sensitive kind of guy, and you'll be able to see that by the waterline or other markings in the water zone or something like that, then yes, clearly they will be open up. But then they'll go, yeah, but I'm not like other blokes, and they probably won't hang out with other men because they go, well, you're really insensitive and stupid and sarcastic and do lots of banter and you hurt people with the way you interact with people, and it's just like it's not even nice. Like, why are you like that? Oh, because you got to get on. You can't admit you're a weak, got any weakness. In a dog eat dog capitalist world, you can't admit to having a weakness. If you admit to having a weakness, you're going to get trodden on, dumped, have your business taken over, or whatever else. My father's motto in life was never admit you've made a mistake, because in the capitalist world he was working in, they would eat you for breakfast. So there's a kind of that avoidance of doing something wrong leads to a kind of hyper vigilance. But also, if you put yourself in a kind of dynamic where there's a vulnerability, you're going to feel the need to protect yourself. And so it depends how that person relates to the criticism and threat of danger that they grew up with, and whether they feel the need to protect themselves, and whether they feel the need to kind of, or they can be open with that. And I think for most men, it's like they don't feel safe to be open, so they won't be. Do you want to, can you, did you understand what I'm talking about? How I've articulated that? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, just barriers and defense mechanisms. Completely understand.
What does it take for a man with a radial loop to become open and authentic then?
Ah, that's a big question. Um, well, probably upbringing. Um,
Mm.
I mean, asking to go from one mode of thinking to another, and in your upbringing, you're either defensive or open. Are you able to be vulnerable? It's vulnerability, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, everyone's vulnerable, everyone's anxious to some extent. So for a man to show vulnerability, in this society, call it, um, Western society, um, it's very, very difficult. I know in Chinese societies, or where it was okay and it was actually safe or seen as being a higher level of being, just to be dreamy or to connect with a deeper emotional side, to connect with your subconscious, that was seen as being okay, but not in Western Europe. No,
Yeah.
that's still seen as being weak.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what everyone's raving about Trump. Yes, he's telling the world the way to do it, that's what we need. The world needs strong leadership, like it's exactly the problem that caused by that. And there's a fear inducement about that approach, which isn't healthy. But it's yeah, big, and if you're weak, then you'll get preyed upon. I mean, that's exactly the languaging of capitalist economy and politics, So it's yeah, men can't be weak, and yeah, if you've got a radial loop, that perceived sense of vulnerability is very strongly present. Um, yeah, I agree with you. Childhood's the bigger thing, but but even a child which is given lots of support, is still going to run into the cultural norms as well if they're born in the Western part of the world. So it's not just a personal thing or a family thing; it's a cultural thing too. So I think it's very difficult. Um, and I think if a guy with a radial loop, once they kind of overcome that defensiveness, I think they'll just want to withdraw from that kind of space and just don't want to be in those kind of spaces. It's just offensive. It's just it's too harsh and too critical and too overwhelming and too difficult. So
Can I just
yeah, yeah,
so what I know that you like Gabor Mate.
yeah. I think he's quite
And
significant today.
yeah, and he's you know he, he's awesome. One of the things he says is, seeds don't grow in on rocky ground, on fertile ground. In other words, if you're tough and you're male and you're strong and and you sort of present this sort of tough demeanor to protect yourself against the outside world, other people may think that you're charismatic and whatever, but you don't grow as a person and you don't really connect with other people. So when he says that seeds don't grow on rocky ground, I can completely understand that. And when in my business life, where I've been involved in a few businesses, it's that sort of tough demeanor where people don't connect and show their vulnerability, which actually has caused the weakness and the fallibility, in the business.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally, totally. I was just thinking about I don't know, where did I do that? Oh, I haven't published that one.
But sorry. So
Go on.
what I'm saying is, for men to say, I feel vulnerable. Actually, you have strength if you can say that,
Yes.
don't you?
Yeah.
But people don't understand that. If you can actually say, okay, I'm really good at this and I'm really bad at that, and I don't think I'm a finance director, but I'm really good at the technical side, but I'm really bad at the strategic side and other things like that. So you break down where you're good and you're weak. That is
Mm,
actually a really intelligent way of actually analyzing where you are.
mm,
But
mm.
other people will see that as a weakness because
Yeah.
you've actually said that you're not good at everything.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that people with radial loops don't want to admit is they're not good at something. Because if they're not good at something, then they'll get attacked. So men with radial loops will never admit that they're not good at something, because if they're not good at something, they know they're going to get stones thrown at them, and they don't want that, because that's what hurts. So that's the mechanism of the radial loop in that particular context. So yeah, so this and that's one of the driving things in the radial loop is like this, desire to be good at everything and to never get things wrong. And that's and like so people with red groups are often really, really good students and really good learners because they don't want to get things wrong. So it's almost, it's a fantastic indicator of a good student. But I will also say they're also mimic artists. The problem with the radial loop is that they will just mimic what they encounter, and they will give a semblance of that. I does anybody know who Richard Webster is? Yeah, you know who Richard Webster is, Jerry. You got his book. And Richard Webster, he lives in Auckland. He's written something like 130 books on angels and palmistry and tarot and crystals and everything like this. And he's like, and he's in the top sort of 10 bestsellers for palmistry books on Amazon. Like he's he knows nothing about hand reading at all. He really knows nothing about hand reading at all. But I happened to meet him at a talk I gave last week in Auckland. He came along. He's actually written an endorsement for my book, which is fantastic. And he thinks it's a great book. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I love your book. Made me want to study palmistry again." And I'm going, "Study palmistry again?" You know, um, you know. But we were talking about fingerprint patterns, and he's got radial loops on both his index fingers. And what he literally has accumulated and assimilated all this information about all this esoteric knowledge. He's got a catalogue of extraordinary, like he must be some kind of esoteric super guru master with various siddhis to be an authority and all those things. But he's not at all. He's this sort of, unassuming bloke who lives in East Auckland, and well, I just write another book. I've got another book coming out, and he's like, there's no depth of wisdom to him at all. He's just accumulated all this information. He's really good at representing it in a format that Llewellyn and other publishers really like. So he's just published hundreds of, he's literally New Zealand's most published author. His catalogue is extraordinary. But what he's done is he's mimicked and reflected back. And I thought, oh, that makes complete sense of why his books are the way they are. It's a real radial loop thing. He's just absorbed all that information on, and it's kind of he's not become, a mystical sage, which but by virtue of the stuff that he's written, he should have, because he should have mastered these stuff. He should be wearing robes and, you know, sitting on a diaz and sort of, scrying and doing a Nostradamus type of thing. He's like, if in theory, if everything that he's written about in his book is true and it's actually something that he's assimilated and actually something that he knows how to do, that's where he would end up. And he's just not like that at all. It's like, oh, I see. You're just a writer, right? That's what he is. You know, he's just accumulated the
So,
information, represented it.
so Christopher, so what you just said about radial loop is what you said. It's more about absorbing than fragility.
Yeah,
In other
totally.
words, the absorbing doesn't necessarily give the fragility, but it's likely to give fragility.
It can do, yeah, but oftentimes it's just the absorbing thing. Like again, Jimi Hendrix is a great example of right. So he's got a radial loop with a whirl inside it. So he's absorbed the entire Haight-Ashbury, Woodstock vibe from 19 London Carnaby Street thing from 1966 to 1969 and re-innovated it in his own twist. But he's taken on board the zeitgeist of the late 1960s. So he's just done it thing exactly that in terms of the level of the zeitgeist. But he's obviously got a creative quality with that as well. So yeah, so that's you're right. It's the radio loop is a great student, but not necessarily a great originator. So there's a problem there. He's Hendrix is a good example of both because he's got a radio loop with a whirl inside it. So he absorbs the whole lot and then does something original and different with it, which is exactly what Jimi Hendrix does. And that's written about in my book, The Palmistry of Fingerprints, which is forthcoming by O Books, coming out in November. So if you haven't
I
read
have
that
a,
one, you've probably read that one as already, haven't about Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, Morgan?
well, I've never heard you say anything about the radial loop aspect of the double loop.
I wasn't talking about a radial loop aspect of a double loop.
I know. It just occurred to me, wait, a double loop is half a radial loop.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Because it's enclosed by two triradii.
Ah,
So double loop's not the same as a radial loop. The double loop
right.
structurally is closer to a whirl.
Yeah,
Okay, but
because of
it's
the
not open on
triradii.
the edge like a radial loop. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right.
that's why.
Cool. All right.
Thanks.